Edge, a new webinar series from LF Edge project at the Linux Foundation. My name is Jill. I am with the Linux Foundation. I'll be your host today. Welcome to today's webinar. Today, it is the second iteration of our series, and we're going to be focusing on EdgeX Foundry. The title of our session today is EdgeX Foundry 101, Introduction, Roadmap, and Use Cases. So before I introduce our panelists, just a couple of housekeeping items. All attendees are going to be muted throughout the presentation. However, you are encouraged to ask questions. There is a Q&A window. Feel free to type your questions anytime they arise in that window. Our presenters may pause to answer, but if not, we are going to open up time at the end of the full presentation to have some interactive Q&A. So they'll be addressed at that time, if not during the presentation. All right, so with that in mind, I'm going to introduce our panelists today. We've got Jim White with IoTech. He's the CTO. He's also the co-chair of the EdgeX Foundry Technical Steering Committee. We also have Camilo Dennis. He's with Intel. He is a co-chair of the EdgeX Foundry WSVG and Marketing Work Group Chair. And we've got Naga Ravindran with Wipro, who's a program manager, and he's a contributor to EdgeX Foundry. So without further ado, I will go ahead and turn the time over to Jim to get us started.
Thanks very much, Jill. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everybody. Today, we're going to cover a few topics here. First of all, we know that this is maybe an introduction to EdgeX Foundry for some of you. So we're going to give you a brief project introduction, and then we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening in the community right now. We're in the midst of a new release just coming out. In fact, we entered freeze yesterday, so we'll talk about what we call the Geneva release. We'll talk about our next release and what's going to be in that, the Hanoi release, and then give you a little bit of an indication of where things are heading in terms of our roadmap overall. And we'd like to also cover with you what the project momentum looks like. What are the milestones? How are people engaging with the project right now? I'll turn that over then to my friend Camilo, who's going to give you some information about the use cases we see out there for EdgeX. And then he'll turn it over to Naga, who will give you some information about Wipro's involvement with our project as well. If we go to the next slide. So in terms of a brief project introduction, first of all, for those of you who are not familiar with our project, happy birthday to our project. We started this project 3 years starting from tomorrow. It will be April 24th, 2017, the anniversary of when we introduced the project through the Linux Foundation at the Hanover Messe Fair. In fact, we were expected to be at the Hanover Messe Fair here about this time again this year. Unfortunately, with the current world situation, we're happy to join you all here today. It is a foundation that was started with 50 companies, and now we have more than 70 companies, as EdgeX is now part of the LF Edge project. Next slide, May. So exactly what is EdgeX Foundry? For those of you who may not be familiar with our project, obviously as part of the Linux Foundation, we're an open source vendor neutral project. We run on any type of hardware. We run on Linux, we run on Unix, we run on Intel, we run on ARM. So we are very much agnostic. It's a microservice loosely coupled framework for doing IoT edge computing. Again, it is shepherded by the Linux Foundation with 70+ companies out there helping to guide it. And we are an Apache 2 project. Apache 2 license, for those of you who are not familiar with open source licensing, is one that's all about being business friendly. You can take the code, you can fork it, you can do whatever you'd like with it, and never have to come back to us for any permissions. The idea is we'd love to have you part of our community and help guide the project, but it is one that you can take and use the project as you see fit. Next slide, May. So exactly what does that mean? There are a lot of words on that slide. Exactly what does that mean to be an open source microservice edge platform? Well, essentially, ladies and gentlemen, what it is EdgeX is an open source middleware. It is middleware between the things, the sensors, the devices that are out there collecting data in these environments, and your IT systems, which could be an enterprise application. It could be some sort of on-prem system. It could be your cloud, your Azure, your Amazon type of environment out there. It's all about getting data from sensors and devices, the things, into your IT world. And we do that with autonomous operations and intelligence at the edge, meaning that if it's all just about collection of data, then there are a number of things out there in the world that can help collect that data. What you also need to be able to do is act on that data locally. You need to be able to trigger what we call actuation back down to devices and sensors. And that's across a whole portfolio of protocols. And that is what EdgeX also does. It provides for local analytics or local intelligence at the edge, acting on that data collected from the sensors. Next slide, May. So there's some words here on the slide about how EdgeX works in some detail. I'll cover some of these quickly, but then I'm going to get right into a diagram that will show you a little bit about how EdgeX work. And I find that showing an architectural diagram usually lends better to understanding a bit about the basics of EdgeX interaction in the microservices. So as I mentioned, it is a collection of microservices, about a dozen or so microservices, depending on what kind of connections you need. It's primarily written in Go and C. We are polyglot believers, however, so there are elements out there in the world that are written in all sorts of languages, and we actually encourage that. Use the language, the technology that you see fit for the part of the system that you want to extend. I'll talk about the data flow here in just a second, and we've got a collection of services that, again, deal with collecting data from the devices and the things and get that up to your cloud and enterprise. It goes through a set of layers that I'll mention here in just a bit. Most of those services communicate via REST. We do use a little bit of message bus communication on occasion, and I'll talk to that in a second. And all of our microservices are able to be deployed via Docker. We also provide a Docker Compose file. However, that's not a requirement. We also produce Ubuntu snaps if you would choose to use that as a mechanism for deployment. And we actually have organizations out there who run EdgeX natively right on top of the OS. You do not have to use a containerization strategy to run EdgeX. We believe in facilitating deployment and orchestration. We don't dictate deployment and orchestration. So we're an application that essentially fits on any type of platform you have and with any type of deployment or orchestration you have. Next slide, May. And May, if you can just kind of click through to bring up all the arrows here on the screen. Thank you. So the way EdgeX works, as you can see, there's a collection of boxes that are in front of you right now. Each one of those represents a microservice. And in general, they're layered. We have, at the bottom, we have what we call device services. Device services are the things, the services closest to the sensors and devices, the things. And their job is to speak a particular protocol and ingest the data from those sensors. So for example, a BACnet device service would collect temperature readings from something like a thermostat out there. Once the device services collect that data, they send the data up into our core services, and especially sending it into what we call core data. That's where we make the data persistent at the edge for a short period of time. We do that for two reasons. You need the data at the edge in order to be able to store and forward that data when you have limited or intermittent connectivity, which you often have in edge environments. And you also need to store the data because if you are doing any kind of local analytics, you may need to take a backward look to see what the temperature was, for example, 2 hours ago in order to know how it is changing. So we store the data for the ability to offload that data at a point in time when we're reconnected, and we store that data for historical queries that we can then actuate on. Once the data has been made available to our core services, it's then pushed up into what we call our application and exporting services. This is where the data is prepared for those IT systems, be it your enterprise, your cloud, your on-prem system. What we do is we take the data, we transform it into whatever format you need. We may compress it, we may encrypt it, depending on what you need, and we prepare it for whatever that endpoint is where you need the data to go. Could be a cloud system. For example, we send data to Amazon. It could be to an on-prem application, something like one of your on-prem factory systems that are actually monitoring and managing what's going on in terms of maintenance on the factory. It really is up to you at that point where the data goes, but the application and exporting services allow us to get it there in a form and a shape that you need it. Maybe if you can click through the other set of arrows. In the same way that the data is prepared for the exporting of data off of the EdgeX platform, we also prepare the data to send it back down to what we call local analytics. In EdgeX, we provide a simple rules engine to allow for actuation. What that rules engine will do, we'll take a look at the data and then based on the rules you have, make a request to send commands back down into the devices and the sensors layer. So that local analytics package can, once it determines some action is needed, fire off into our command service and then into the actual device services again. So our series of services not only facilitate the collecting of data and getting it what we call northbound to those enterprise and cloud systems, it also prepares data for use internally for any local analytics you have. And we do mean any local analytics. Each box you see here on the screen again is a microservice. It's a microservice that's provided by EdgeX, but at the same time has an open API. And so if you choose to replace it with your own implementation, you can certainly do so. And we actually facilitate that. And local analytics is one of those areas we perceive to be one of the services most often replaced by others, as your analytics, your needs are going to vary based on application and use case. If we go ahead and click through then, May, down to the next slide. And again, this is the yellow arrows representing kind of the actuation back down to devices and sensors. So boiling it down to kind of the crude essence of what EdgeX is all about, I tell people that really, if you want to think about EdgeX in the simplest of terms, it's a middleware edge application, and it's one that's set up to do dual transformation. It's a dual transformation engine. We're constantly changing data from the sensors and things, from the protocols that they provided into our core services, and then from the core services to up to the application services, where it's then made available to, again, your clouds, your applications, your north side systems. So we transform at the south side from protocols into EdgeX, and at the north side from EdgeX to whatever is going to use that data in your IT systems. And then of course, back down again, allowing your IT systems to communicate with those sensors and things by again, communicating through these same layers and communicating via protocol of choice back down to the thing at the south side. Next slide. So in general, what is EdgeX? Again, an open source edge middleware product that provides dual transformation from anything protocol into EdgeX in our data format and our data structure, and then from our edge data format structure to any TCP IP based system that you might have out there, and vice versa, taking it in the opposite direction again in order to allow for actuation back down to those sensors and devices, allowing for command of those sensors and devices. Next slide. So that's kind of a brief introduction about what EdgeX is about, how it works. How is the project going? What is our cadence? We release twice a year. We release in the spring and we release in the fall. And we are right now in the midst of our 6th community release. We codename Geneva. We just went into freeze and we're about ready to release this on May 13th if everything goes well through the freeze period. As you might be able to tell in the naming, we use kind of the Android naming schema of having an alphabetical structure to it. So A, B, C, D, and we're up to G with Geneva. Our next release will be Hanoi in October of 2020. And we're getting ready to plan that release. In fact, we are in the midst here, and we'll have a slide here in just a second. We'll invite you to participate as part of that planning session, if you so desire. So if we can go to the next slide, May. What is going to be in the Geneva release? Well, coming out here on May 13th, again, our 6th edition, this will be a dot release. It's going to be version 1.2. A couple of major themes here. We're going to be providing automatic provisioning of devices and sensors. What that means is if the protocol allows it, when a device or sensor comes in range to EdgeX or gets plugged in, our device services would automatically detect that and automatically make that sensor or device able to talk to EdgeX without any kind of manual intervention. Think about something like a BLE sensor. If it came in range of a box that's running EdgeX, that would mean that that BLE sensor could automatically be set up to start communicating with EdgeX and start communicating its data right away without human intervention. So a pretty nice feature, not going to be something you would use in every use case or for every type of device, but there are a lot of devices out there where this allows for very quick system setup. We're providing for alternate messaging support. Most of the messaging that we use today in EdgeX is 0MQ, but we've expanded that, and now in many cases you can use MQTT. We provide for better typing of sensor data so that as you are seeing the data flow through EdgeX, you'll be able to tell, is that a float or is that an int? More information will be provided in the way that that data is transmitted, so you have better indication of that. We have a new REST device service. So if you have a sensor or device, or even if you're communicating with something like the internet, you have the ability to communicate via REST. We've got better batch store and forward. So now you can schedule when that data is going to be moved to the north side. We support secure MQTT and secure HTTPS export of the data to your IT systems. We're also offering Redis as the default database. Up until this release, we've been using Mongo. Redis offers better open source licensing, and it also offers some capability that makes things a bit tighter, smaller, faster from an edge perspective. We're replacing the rules engine up to date. We've been using a Java-based rules engine. We're now using a Go-based Kuiper rules engine, which actually uses SQL to help configure it. And a couple of improvements in terms of things like security, interoperability testing has been improved, and we've improved our DevOps procedures to use a new tool called pipelines to help smooth out that process and make the turnaround of our artifacts a little bit quicker, smoother, and faster. Next slide, May. From Geneva, we move to Hanoi. Hanoi is our release scheduled for the fall. It will likely be a minor release as well, so a 1.3 release. However, that is subject to change as we're getting ready to plan out that release. Major themes for this upcoming release will be an improved set of APIs. We're going to try to make them more transport agnostic, not so tightly coupled to HTTP. And we're also decoupling a lot of the data that's provided in them. We're also providing device service to application service directly via message bus. That would mean you can bypass core data, which means you don't have to persist the data at the edge. Not every use case requires us to do that, and obviously that'll make things a little bit faster and provide for better quality of service in terms of the messaging. We're also supporting running devices on different hosts. So you could have a device service, for example, running on a Raspberry Pi, while the rest of EdgeX is running on a stronger and faster gateway, for example. We're improving the filtering at the device service level, so you can filter out data that may be inconsequential or duplicate. And we're again improving testing and providing performance guidelines to people so they'll know what kind of hardware platform might they need to run EdgeX given their use case. And lastly, we're providing for a root of trust abstraction so that if your platform that you're going to run on EdgeX has a TPM or TEE, you should be able to use that to help secure the secrets that are inside of EdgeX. Now, as I mentioned, the planning for this release is about to get underway next week. We have a planning conference scheduled. Typically, this is face-to-face, but right now it's going to be held in a virtual mode. If you have interest, as you can see, there is a link on the screen, and the public is invited. We are a complete open source project, so we welcome all contributions in to the conversation and help us plan the future of this product. Next slide, May. So where are we in terms of momentum? We have again, a release that's in its 6th revision. We have over 180 EdgeX contributors globally today. About 30 to 40 of those are active in any given release. And we just surpassed 4.3 million container downloads on March 31st. And in March, that was the first month where we had a month of more than 1 million container downloads in that month alone. So we think the momentum behind EdgeX is growing very, very strong. We're seeing rapid adoption and a lot of users out there picking up EdgeX and using it to develop their edge solutions. We translate the 4.3 million container downloads into what we think is about estimated 300,000 deployments. Now that's a little bit hard to absolutely pinpoint. And unfortunately, Docker Hub doesn't exactly give us a means to know exactly where all those deployments are. But with a rough estimate, we're seeing essentially what is about a 30% growth each month with regard to where EdgeX is being used and deployed. Next slide, May. In terms of our contributors and authorships, we are nothing without those people who help us build this system. And as I mentioned, we've got about 180 total contributors around the globe. And as you can see here, our inputs come from a lot of large companies to include Dell, Intel, my own company, IoTech, but also things like RSA, VMware, Canonical, all contributors into the project. And of course, we also get contributions from individuals out there just very much interested in IoT and trying to find solutions to help in their particular customer settings or project settings. So not everybody is associated with a big company, and we welcome all into the EdgeX tent. Next slide, May. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Camilo to give you a few of the use cases that you'll see EdgeX being used in.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Jim. So I'll go through community collaboration first. So I'll tell you about what are the opportunities for new companies or new developers to EdgeX on how to participate and get engaged. And then I'll go through the use cases, and I have a guest that will go through his use case, which is Naga from Wipro. So in terms of what we're doing to engage with the developers, so as Jim was saying, GitHub downloads, you don't get a lot of visibility on who is behind those. So we're driving competitions, and we're revamping our EdgeX Foundry website to create incentives for people to come forward and basically tell us, this is how I'm using EdgeX and this is the things that I'm doing with EdgeX. And for that, we launched last year in Q4 in October, the first physical hackathon in presence with retail use cases. So we had different members of the community. This was teams competing, so it wasn't an individual competition, and we have mostly corporate teams participating. Very good experience. You have here a blog to recap the event and also a video. And this year, obviously, with what's happening in the world with the restrictions and work from home, we launched about a month ago our first virtual EdgeX challenge. So we're using the Top Coder platform, and we got 130 participants, and the judging is going on right now. We're expecting to have the winners by the end of this week. So in the Chicago one was more focused on retail use cases. The ideation challenge is obviously open to any ideas on how will you use EdgeX to solve a problem. So we're still going through the submissions. We have about 20 submissions at the end of the challenge, and what we've seen so far is that it's across the board: manufacturing, healthcare, etc. Next slide. Another way we engage with our developers is through awards. So every year, the project gives awards, and this is based on a voting process of the active contributors on the most the best innovation from a contributor, and also the contributor that is being very active in the project for that year. So again, the working groups and the active contributors are the ones that vote for this. And this year, the announcement of the winners is going to come out soon. Next slide. So another way to participate, if you're not a developer, but you're more someone that works with a company, you're in a software vendor company or system integrator, this is a working group that we have every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. Is 10 a.m. Pacific right now. So we will send the slides after the presentation. This is where you can sign up to attend. And what we're trying to do with this forum is to have more a user perspective, getting feedback from companies that are exploring EdgeX as a possibility to integrate with their existing solution, or to just figure out if this is something that makes sense for their strategic roadmap. That's obviously where we talk about what EdgeX is, what it's not, and we use this group to provide feedback to the technical steering committee on features and use cases that are becoming relevant for EdgeX. Other than that, there's other community resources that you see down there in the page. We have a Slack channel, a YouTube channel, and obviously EdgeX website is where you can find a lot of the latest information on the project. Next slide. So one of the things that we saw in terms of, as Jim was going through the momentum of the project, we had a lot of traction in China right now, and the vertical solution working group was more US friendly in the sense that it was in English, and the time was in Asia friendly. So because of the growth that we saw in the ecosystem there, and the companies that were joining, we kicked off this new project in Q4, and it's in local language, and it's obviously China friendly in terms of the timing where they meet. But you can see a number of participants and the type of companies that have joined. So across the board, many verticals, and the number of participants has grown significantly with only 1 quarter. Next slide is, so this is where I start talking about the use cases. So how does it look when you have a demo or a deployment for using EdgeX? And this is a very interesting one because it was the showcase of many companies working together. So Intel has something called the Open Retail Initiative, where we promote open source ingredients like EdgeX to drive adoption at scale with retailers of different technologies. And it was meant to be an example of a specific use case, but more than that, it was to showcase how you can have the data in ingestion through EdgeX. So we called it real-time sensor fusion. And the use case was specific to the self-checkout areas in a grocery store, where you're trying to prevent people from taking things that they didn't pay for, or trying to fool the system by taking a high price item and making you fooling the system that is a lower price item. So the whole idea, and the next slide has the diagram. Here you can find a couple of blogs that we wrote afterwards, and this was showcased at NRF, which is the biggest retail show in the world. It's in New York. It was in January this year, and usually gets around 40,000 visitors. We had a very similar demo. It wasn't exactly the same, but it was the same idea of using different companies working through EdgeX.
Yes, hello.
And we had it showcased in the Intel booth as well as the HP booth. So in the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more on how the demo worked. Next slide. Okay, so here you have, this is an integration that traditionally would have been time consuming and very challenging. And one of the things that we saw is how the complexity gets reduced. Not only the complexity, but the time to market gets improved. Previous slide, May. By using EdgeX. So Fluid is a point of sale system. We were using that point of sale system with HP hardware. You have Edgify as a computer vision company. Shekel, they use scale for weight, and an RFID sensor for high price items. So the idea here is that not one sensor is perfect. And what this does in terms of real-time sensor fusion is you can have the 4 sensors working at the same time, because we made the POS a sensor as well. And you have a reconciliator. So IoTech provides a commercially support a product called EdgeXpert. And through that, we were able to do the ingestion of each of the data in real time, and do the reconciliation of are you paying for the right items. The time to bring this to reality was short term, because usually in retail, the point of sale is very complex. And what we did with this was just make sure that each of these companies was able to publish the data into EdgeX, as opposed to try to integrate within themselves. And make sure that those companies are doing what they are experts on, as opposed to the point of sale system trying to become better with computer vision and so on and so forth. So Edgify is a computer vision company that detects produce, bananas, apples, etc., even within a bag. Shekel is what you usually see today in the checkout area. Is just by weight. And RFID was something that some retailers already have, and in the case that they're trying to include it to make this higher accuracy, you can do it only for high price items. You don't have to do it for every single one. So in the demo, we demonstrated different examples on how to try to fool the system, and how you can fool the weight, but the computer vision will work, or vice versa. And at the end, as Jim was saying, not only you send this northbound into an edge device, but you use those analytics to alert and associate whenever there's something that is not, whenever there's a red flag. And what you see on the right-hand side is just an example of, once you have a deployment of this type, it gives you the flexibility to start adding other sensors and creating different solutions from that are not necessarily related to loss prevention, but can be related to a promotion engine, a loyalty program, so on and so forth. So it lends itself very well for greenfield and brownfield deployments. So with that, we also have another use case and example from Wipro manufacturing. So Naga, go ahead. Can you guys hear Naga?
No, Naga, we can't hear you. It looks like you've got a couple of different lines open, and it looks like they're all muted. Heard you for a second there. You want to try again?
Yeah, hello?
Yes.
Able to hear me?
Yes, great.
Okay, sorry about that. There was a problem with the connection. So to give a little bit background, we have been working on EdgeX for quite some time. I will briefly touch upon how we started our EdgeX journey with one of the solutions we are building in manufacturing space. So the background, as part of our group, we have a homegrown accelerator, which is called as a multi-protocol IoT gateway. It's a software framework that runs on Linux, which supports different southbound, northbound connectivity options and other features like on-prem visualization dashboard and lightweight rules engine and all that. This gateway stack is already commercially deployed in use cases for healthcare, utility space, and it's successfully running now. Though we had a commercial success, we have migrated some of our existing offerings to EdgeX based. There were a few reasons why we wanted to migrate as part of our long-term roadmap. We constantly focus on enhancing our software stack. That's how we started exploring EdgeX. And based on our study, we kind of realized that there are few coupling reasons for us to migrate our stack to EdgeX based. So as Jim mentioned earlier in this webinar, EdgeX already supports a lot of microservices that are readily available for rapid application development. The capabilities are continuously being upgraded as part of these biannual releases. And one of the key considerations for us is the EdgeX architectural tenets, which is very critical for requirement for any gateway stacks. And also the recent releases are more ruggedized and they are of production grade releases. Another key point is the user-friendly license, which are available for commercial deployments. So all these critical considerations triggered us to move towards in the direction of EdgeX. Having said that, our current focus is so the current focus is we would like to with EdgeX offering the different services, we would like to focus more on building vertical use cases by adding the required additional services needed to build different vertical applications and all that. So some of our focus areas include enhancing the device service layer based on what the use case demands. It may be a new wired or wireless protocol like Zigbee or a simulator service to integrate with the plant simulation software to demonstrate end-to-end workflow in the absence of a real plant for deployment. So this is one area where we focus. And the machine learning models, these are again very specific to the use case what we build. It may be for an anomaly detection or a predictive prescriptive analytics and all that. So today, one of the use case what I'm going to talk about that uses an anomaly detection model. And another focus area is enabling northbound connectivity to some of our existing other accelerators by leveraging app service SDK and all that. So we, as part of our group, apart from multi-protocol IoT gateway, we also have several other accelerators which are hosted on different clouds. So we wanted to ensure with EdgeX, we are able to connect to all these accelerators seamlessly. So that's another focus area. And some of other things are on-prem visualization capability, which are useful in some specific requirements and all that. So in the next slide, we'll walk you through one of the use cases that we built with EdgeX. Yeah, the use case we built is a surface quality inspection for a manufacturing plant that produces piston rods. These piston rods are used in vehicle and equipments in different applications like construction, earth moving, or utilities and all that. You can consider excavator, dumper, forklifts as an example, which is using the piston rods. So in the manufacturing plant, the production of these piston rods goes through different stages like induction, hardening, friction welding, threading, polishing, and all that. And At the end of each of these stations, there are some quality checkpoints which are either manual or automated. It goes through all these stages and finally comes to a conveyor belt where the final surface level quality inspection is going to happen. This is mostly a manual inspection. At this stage, a highly skilled, experienced human inspector who looks for different type of defects like scratches, dents, or the material defects and different type of handling defects and all that. So based on the final quality inspection result, it either goes to a packaging and shipment area or to a rework area. So that's how the plant currently operates. The problem with these manual inspections are they are costly, time consuming, and dependent on human judgment as well. So the customer was looking at reducing the inspection cost time, improve the overall accuracy and all that. And also they wanted to have a real-time view of what's happening in the plant from a remote machine. So in order to address this problem, we kind of proposed an image analytics solution based on AIML to identify surface defects on factory floor in real time. In our current implementation, which is phase 1, we prove the concept by using real cameras and a few sample good and bad rods from the factory, which are with different type of anomalies in it. We created a deep learning model by training with previously analyzed and classified defects. When the rod is available for inspection, the gateway kind of triggers the camera to take surface pictures. The picture captured is then fed into the inference engine running on the gateway, which analyzes and confirms if there are any anomalies. So once done, the analytics output is fed into the business application, which provides different dashboards for productivity, number of good rods, number of bad rods, and all that. That's where we stand right now. So as part of the subsequent phases, the actual plant integration, the analysis of historical data for similar issues and providing feedback for potential corrective actions and all that are planned in the subsequent phases of this solution. Some of the key benefits with this solution would be the reduction in the inspection cost time, improved accuracy, and mainly the centralized management where we can have the real-time view of what's happening in the plant from a remote machine. About the technical aspects, the solution is completely built on top of EdgeX framework, which is heart of our system. To realize this use case, we added new services and customizations like the camera device service, the deep learning model running on Intel's OpenVINO accelerator, primarily to improve the performance. The app SDK usage for connecting to other accelerators what we have hosted on the cloud, and some amount of local analytics using the rules engine what Jim talked about well ago, right? Next slide, May. Yeah, thank you. So this is a snapshot of the application hosted on cloud, which is connected to the gateway that pushes inference output. This application is called a manufacturing performance dashboard, which is one of our another accelerator customized to realize end-to-end flow for this solution. The view that you see is a deep dive view for one of the plants that's connected to a gateway. As you see, it shows different stations within the plant, the overall health of the plant, different KPIs that are being monitored for each of these stations, and how many of those KPIs are within its acceptable limits and all that. So the KPI can be the number of rods manufactured, number of good rods, bad rods, number of false positives, false negatives, and all that. Those are the different KPIs what we have. So if you want to have a more deeper look at any particular KPI, for example, if you want to look at how that KPI is performing for today or the specific week or a month back, so all that deep dive and different views are available with this application. That's about what we have built as part of this use case using EdgeX. This solution was demonstrated in CES this year. So in the absence of a real plant to demonstrate the end-to-end flow, we integrated our software stack to plant simulation module. This kind of gives a complete picture of how the end-to-end system will work. And it was very well received by customers visiting our booth. So this is a brief about what we have done with EdgeX, and looking forward for a long journey with EdgeX. That's all I have. Over to you, Jim.
Thanks, Naga. And I just want to leave everybody with a collection of links here that you can find more information on. Obviously, we've got our GitHub repositories for our code, but you'll find our technical documentations out there. In fact, one of the questions was from somebody who had asked about where to find our docs. So thanks for that question. We have a wiki site where a lot of the communication on the project is ongoing. You can even drop in and listen to recordings from past meetings to understand the technical direction of the project. We've got a blog site, email distribution, and Slack channels, all available to help communicate if you are working in an EdgeX project and you're trying to get some help from our technical community. Great places to go to get that help. And May and the others at the Linux Foundation do a great job of providing our social media feeds, so LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube, all provided on the links on the screen as well. With that, I'm going to turn it back over to Jill. Thank you all very much.
Great, thank you, Jim. Thanks, Naga. Thanks, Camilo. Just before we open it up for some Q&A, I just wanted to do a quick plug for a webinar that we've got going next week. It's entitled The State of the Open Networking and Edge. And it's a keynote webinar, and it's going to be hosted by Arpit Joshipura, who's the General Manager of Networking, IoT, and Edge at the Linux Foundation. So there's going to be some news announcements and some other good information. So please go ahead and mark your calendars for that if you haven't already. And then following the next iteration of On the Edge with LFEdge, next month is going to be featuring Project Eve. We don't have a date for that yet, but please look out. Check your social media and your email, and we'll be sharing that and promoting it once that date is available as well. All right, so on to Q&A. It looks like there were a handful of questions that Jim answered already in the chat window, but if looks like we've got another one that is still open, and if anyone else has questions, please feel free to type them in.
Yeah, Nick, the question that's currently online, there's maybe May or Jill, can you possibly copy that link from the webinar that's upcoming over to the chat session there so people can have access to that. And hopefully, gang, I was able to answer the questions that you had online there. Great questions, and thank you all for those. And maybe I can just try to address a couple of others here. And we do have ones asking, are there any case studies or proof of concept out there yet? We do have some of those that are listed online through our website, and I know that is something that Camilo is working very diligently on with regard to our vertical solution working group. Camilo, do you want to answer that as well in terms of some of the things we're doing to revamp the website? Did we lose Camilo?
Is he possibly on mute?
Yeah, thank you. I was looking for the button. Yeah, this is something that we continue to look for. And as Naga did today, that's a good use case that can become a proof of concept or case study. So we encourage those in the community that are using it, but we have the demo that I show you that Intel did in the NRF trade show. We are converting that into a smaller demo that we can travel with, and ideally we can take it to ONES, which is the Open Networking Edge conference from LFEdge coming in September. But yeah, so we're moving. The project is pivoting as Jim was talking about the .1 release last summer into having a more end user focus, and that's what the vertical solutions working group is right now. And we're also going to be talking in the Hanoi conference about how to serve end users better and how to create more POCs and use cases, and and case studies for that.
Yeah, great answer. Thanks, Camilo. So a couple of other questions have come in here, gang. One is, how do you convince the not solution providers who already have a monolithic solution to move over to EdgeX? Great question. Tough one sometimes to answer, but I think you've kind of nailed it right in your question yourself, in that EdgeX is a microservice-based open platform with an ecosystem of 70+ companies behind it. Whereas some of these monolithic systems, I don't take anything away from some of the monolithic systems that are out there. If that solution works for you, if you're looking for a system that is closed, operated by one company, and that solution works for you, then why would you change? I'm not trying to convince anybody to move from something that is already working for them. What we find in this space is that open tends to work better in a space where it really requires multiple partnerships, integration to all sorts of types of things, and no one company has all of the answers. Typically, you're dealing with dozens of protocols. You're dealing with back-end systems that range from some sort of cloud system to some sort of application, and you need to piece all those things together. And then, oh, by the way, you have to bring in analytics packages and other connectors to things that you'd never seen or heard before. And that's tough to do under one organization. So we find having an open platform, one where the community brings to you the kind of the meat and potatoes, the heart of the system, along with SDKs and tools to help you assemble and get access to the other pieces you need to integrate with, works better than where you have to deal with one company and hope they provide it all. So that's usually my story in trying to address that kind of question, but it is a tough one, and one that there are reasons and rationales for using a monolithic solution if it fits all of your needs.
Yeah, and I think I can add from the retail point of view, what we've seen in Intel, we have an IoT group looking at retail technologies and adoption, and it's usually the big companies that can afford the proprietary solutions. So the adoption at scale of these technologies, even though the cost of hardware and solutions has come down, the complexity is still high, and it's not affordable for the rest of the companies. You will call it a 20-80, right? So 80% of the companies are not adopting because it's very expensive. And the proprietary systems usually have their innovation cadence or roadmap, and you're tied to that. In the case of a community like this, you foster innovation by being able to use and leverage the community with whatever they're coming up next. And you obviously have the support of the community as well to reduce the risk on what are the things that you want to be adopting or not. So in terms of trying new things and using EdgeX as a way to hedge in building your next solution is a really good tool. And that's what we're trying to do. I think the proprietary solutions are great and they're not going away. It's just a different market also that you need to think when you're trying to figure out which one is best for what type of company.
Another question we have is, how is EdgeX interacting with the edge networking? So edge networking, very much like cloud networking, a little bit nebulous. And if somebody is talking about something more specific, please provide a little bit of clarification there. But so EdgeX is an application. It's going to ride on top of the infrastructure, right? It's going to ride on top of the hardware and the network that is available. Obviously, from an EdgeX perspective, EdgeX needs that network to be able to communicate the data to your backend, to backhaul that data, if you will, into your IT systems. But EdgeX has been built to try to interoperate with whatever network is available there. And in some cases, that network is intermittent. We have to deal with the fact that we're often running on platforms that are relatively resource constrained, and in some cases that is resource constrained around the network. We have to shoot the data into the IT systems when the connection is there, or in some cases when been made available to us in short bandwidth. So EdgeX has tried to address that, to try to deal with things where the edge network is sometimes sparse and sometimes intermittent, to try and operate in those kinds of environments. Having said that, EdgeX is also able, as almost any software application, to ride on top of a very firm and very active network and take advantage of that as well. And we can distribute over the course of many compute platforms where the networks are many as well. A lot of it depends on your use case. A lot of it depends on how you want to break EdgeX apart. And some of that, when it gets to some complex networking, may require you to go in to customize EdgeX in bits and pieces. But that's the beauty of EdgeX, is in its flexibility. And where that flexibility doesn't quite meet your needs, we provide the pieces in an open way to allow you to go in and customize to fit and lay over whatever you have available. Is there any fleet management component inherited or recommended? Well, we're certainly looking at various use cases, and fleet management is one that we think EdgeX has applicability to. Even when you start to look at fleet management, some people also start to break that down into more connected car or connected truck type scenarios, and EdgeX could even operate in certain limited cases in those use cases as well. So I think it's one of the use case areas where EdgeX is applicable. Do we have anything specific to fleet management built into EdgeX? EdgeX, again, is a platform, folks. It's a platform for generic use at the edge. We work with organizations out there that are trying to make specific its use in various vertical and various use case environments, in which case fleet management would be one of those where somebody may want to have to customize to specific protocols or customize particular analytics engines, for example, for those needs. But again, as a flexible platform, it can do that. Camille, do you have anything else to answer, to add to the fleet management question?
Yeah, no, and that's kind of the things that we want to talk about in the vertical solution working groups. If there's you need to lead from the point of view of this is what I'm looking for, and what are the things that EdgeX can help you provide. I'll give you an example on the demo that I showed for NRF, the weight scale. There wasn't a device service for it, and the EdgeX community created one for a weight scale that now anyone can use. So after we did the demo, Intel has now a reference solution that is all based on open source, that if there's anyone that is interested in replicating something very similar, can start from there. So as you discuss with the broader community, this is what I'm trying to drive for fleet management, and this is the devices that I'm interested on, etc., and the standards. That's when you start the conversation and see how the community can help you, and you obviously contribute back to the community.
Thanks, Camille.
So it looks like we had a question pop up in the chat window, and then there's another one in the Q&A window. So if we want to take the chat window one first, I think that's been there longer, Jim.
Sure can, yeah. So I think the question there is, have we had any exposure to Pertainer and its Pertainer Edge controller? So thanks, David. And the answer there is absolutely. In fact, we're in communication with Neil Cresswell and the Pertainer team. My own company, IoTech, is actually working with Neil and the Pertainer team to work on some products and make our commercially available EdgeX work through some of that Edge controller and look for more information and more details on both our own product, but also how EdgeX will hopefully interact with that team going forward. So nothing yet to share today, David, but look for some information there coming out. And we are very much aware of that project. And from Rami, I see a question on the question is about how does EdgeX handle cameras and media rendering data flow? Does it flow outside of EdgeX? So EdgeX is about what I'll call data in a structured way. EdgeX deals very well with things like temperatures and vibration data. When you start dealing with cameras, there's a video stream, and EdgeX can help direct your other IT systems to that video stream. It can help manage the camera. It can help, for example, set the focal point if it's set up to communicate with a product like EdgeX through a protocol, something like OnViv. It can also take a snapshot out of that stream and make that available as kind of a discrete piece of data. So think about a video stream maybe in a parking lot. If there were then snapshots of the license plates, EdgeX could get those license plate snapshots to an analytics engine that could start to actually give you the actual license plate numbers. So EdgeX can help in these kinds of use cases. What EdgeX is not, it is not a visual inference engine. So it is not going to take the video stream and try to do something with it. That is the job of many visual inferences packages out there. And usually those visual inference packages are modeled after a particular use case. So for example, facial recognition versus, as Camilla was advising about the NRF demo, one that recognizes a bottle of wine versus a banana. So EdgeX helps facilitate in those kinds of use cases. It is not going to be the visual inference. You will have to work with EdgeX and some of those visual inference companies out there to help bring those two together. What about the Home Assist IO project is another question from David. So again, another one of the projects that we are familiar with. That is one that has a little bit more kinship to the Home Edge project under LF Edge. And Home Edge project is actually building their solution on top of EdgeX. So ancillarily, I guess through connection of a sister project, we are in connection with the Home Assist IO project. I will defer, David, to that community for more information on what they're seeing and how they're working with that. Unfortunately, it's not my specialty. I'll turn over to here Camilla or Naga if they have any other information as far as that's concerned.
No, I don't, but I was just going to add on the computer vision question. The two use cases we talked about today both use computer vision inference model outside, and again, is you publish the data that you need from those models into EdgeX, and is about how you can use that information to drive something that is just more broad than the solution of use computer vision, and that's when you start adding and combining data from different sensors.
Well put, Camilla. Absolutely. Let's see, a couple other questions have been dropped into the window here. So, is there support for languages other than C and Go in upcoming releases? That is something we continually inspect. Let me phrase the question, or maybe take the question and swizzle it in a slightly different way. So there are parts of EdgeX which our community has written, which probably nobody in the world will ever have to adjust. They are core bits of the application that just do their function. And what they're written in probably isn't going to matter to you because you're going to use those particular services as is. Many of those services are written in Go, and you certainly are welcome to go in and inspect those. And if you wanted to, you could even replace them. There are other parts of EdgeX where you may want to add your own additional elements. And for that, we provide SDKs. We provide SDKs, for example, for device services, and an SDK for application services, which communicate with the northbound side. And in those extension areas, we are always looking at potentially moving into other languages. What we really need is the community and the support of those outside to come and help us with that, and to help provide requirements that there is an absolute need, but also help us with some hands to get that job done. So C and Go tend to be two languages that we use predominantly in these areas today. Again, we're an edge application, so we have to be a little bit concerned about the size and the footprint of this, as it has to go into some relatively resource constrained environments. So not to say that we couldn't use languages that are not compiled down, but that are running on a virtual machine. We have and we can in the future, but we have to also be concerned about, well, what would be the user base for that, and what would be the use case for that? So a good question, and one that we continue to monitor, but we're also looking for feedback from you all to tell us where you think some of those needs are and how it's going to work in an edge environment. Let's see, EdgeX is plumbing hidden in the walls, but hopefully open and flexible enough to not have to tear the walls open in the future. Boy, I sure hope so, David. In answer to your question, we are working very, very hard in the EdgeX community to think about things like backward compatibility. We even have a long-term service strategy in place, one that says that, you know, once we have a product out there and we label it LTS, we want to be very careful about making sure that we provide kind of the longer term maintenance of that product. So we're conscious of the fact that in OT environments, sometimes those systems don't change for 7 or 10 years or even longer. So we have to build a platform that is supportive of that. At the same time, we have to offer new features going forward. And so we have to think about how we do that in a constructive and not a destructive way. It's a fine line, but I'm thinking that you'll find most of the community has this as very much a conscious point as we make each new decision.
Yeah. And so we actually have 1 minute left, and I believe we get cut off right at 10. So there is one more question. I want to thank everybody for joining. Jim, if you can answer that in the 1 minute, go for it. Otherwise, we can do follow-up, potentially a blog post, or follow up with this individual offline.
Thanks, Jill. Is there any provision for software updates? EdgeX deploys with Docker containers. We also have Ubuntu snaps. Those are two mechanisms today that provide many different facilities out there to do automatic updates. And EdgeX, we facilitate deployment orchestration. We don't dictate. And so a lot of it depends on which tooling and which environments you use to provide that kind of update.
All right. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for joining. Thanks for our panelists, and we hope to see you on a future webinar. Have a great day.
Thank you.